there's a lot of work that goes into what Sean just presented. And I know we understand that. Um, so many people are involved in bringing recommendations and kind of working through each facet of what he presented to you. And I'm just really excited, again, to be back in this opportunity, in this position, to be able to bring forth a recommendation of a pretty largely reduced scope Performing Arts Center, but I think one that really addresses most, if not all, of the needs that we set out striving to address back in 2018, and I know probably long before that. So I'm thankful, but I'm also excited about the possibility of next steps. So thank you for all of your work and commitment to our kids here at Wilson. So as we bring forth to our community and our board this recommendation here in just a couple weeks around phase one, we also have been working very diligently around one of the largest issues I think we have presently before us, which is the growth of our organization. Growth from the standpoint of students and kids that we serve, growth in our community from our local municipalities, as evidenced by the new construction that we all see driving around wherever it is that we're going on a daily basis. This recommendation today was also brought forth previously at different times throughout the last 4 or 5 years. And we've taken a lot of the feedback and learnings that we've experienced from those presentations and conversations with the community, with our staff, with the board, to heart when we made these recommendations. So today what you're going to see is a recommendation for how we are proposing to move forward to address the overcrowding at our elementary schools and our middle schools. And we're going to walk through a variety of different pieces of this for the next 20 or 30 minutes. So before, I just want to bring us back to this slide. We've talked about this slide quite a few times. It's just really our operational guiding principles for our buildings. I'm not going to read all of these, but essentially these are the things that we keep in the back of our mind that we talk about when we're making informed recommendations on how we want to move. You know, we talk about safety, we talk about efficient programming and effective programming. We talk about the cost, making sure that we're being mindful of the recommendations we're bringing forth, that they achieve the majority of our goals while also being mindful of the cost that's pushed down to our taxpayers. Making sure that we're planning for the future, not just today, but for tomorrow and for years down the road. Making sure that we're focusing on opportunities for kids and our staff, and trying to create an environment where those opportunities can be as similar as possible to provide those equitable experiences, whether they're for our staff, for our teachers, for our families, regardless of where their child goes to school. That's an important piece that our team focuses on. And obviously making sure we're reflecting the values and needs of this community. We're very fortunate to have a large number of administrators and obviously our entire board who sends their own children, or did send their children to the school district. So I do think that we're in tune with the needs of the community and the values that exist within our schools. So again, just a little bit of a history here. We've been working on this project for some time. Started with an analysis of our site, our physical plant. We reviewed how we're doing as an organization with our mechanicals and our facilities. The board authorized that study roughly 6 years ago. It's hard to believe, 5.5 years ago now. Lots of different options, lots of different things that came before this board. Obviously, we had a pandemic. We had a lot of things that were thrown at us, which required us to shift. And shift we did. And continue to go back to the drawing board to make sure that we could achieve the goals that we had identified. While we've been doing that, we've also been analyzing data. And I'm going to talk to you about the data that we've been pulling in, which leads us to today. Just want to reference a website that exists on our district website. It's linked here, as well as just by going out to our district page, which kind of archives all of this work that's moving forward. So the presentation tonight is really going to just simply provide our recommendation regarding phase two, which will address the enrollment increase that we're experiencing, the overcrowding at our elementary schools, all 5 of them. It also addresses the need for a renovation at Southern Middle School to provide that educational experience that we were talking about for all kids. So we're going to have to look at enrollment data again and just kind of talk a little bit about where we've come from. The green here represents us as a school district and the kids that we serve. When we start to get into the colored bars on the right, we're looking specifically at this demographer that we've talked about over the years. Their company is called Decision Insight. It's owned by Power Schools, so sometimes we interchange those two terms, but it is the same company. So they've partnered with us on 3 different occasions to analyze trends, to look at census data, to look at construction dwellings in our school district, working with municipalities to try to get a good handle on how our patterns are shifting. They present the data in two different ways. One is conservative. That's represented here in the yellowish, I'll go with yellow, it goes with a yellow bar. They also present it in a moderate. Those are their terms, and that is the more aggressive of the two predictions. We then develop just simply a line of best fit, or for this presentation, we will call that an average, which is just simply an average of those two pieces. So the trends here that we're looking for, we're not looking for 1 year, we're not looking for a 1 year where we go up and 1 year where we go down. We're really trying to generate trends. So going back to 2019, we're showing 10 years here, 4 years in the past, 6 in the future, 23 being this upcoming school year. Going from 6,220 kids, somewhere between 6,419 and 6,685. We've talked about this before. This is not normal. This is not what other school districts in the Commonwealth are experiencing, and it's definitely not what school districts in Berks County are experiencing. So this is a challenge, albeit a great one, to have kids that want to come to our school and families that want to send their kids to Wilson, but it's definitely a challenge that we need to tackle. So we also then, for the purpose of this presentation, pulled in another data source. And now we're representing the decision insight average, and that's what we'll be using on the next couple slides here, as well as the Pennsylvania Department of Education's prediction. And you see that there's, I wouldn't call that hugely statistically significant, but we are talking 218 kids roughly. So when you break that down into our separate schools, that's definitely something we need to keep our eyes on. Obviously, if a large number of those kids end up at Southern Middle School versus West, it kind of depends on where they go. So you see, again, these trend lines are going up. PDE's averages in this particular slide, total district enrollment we're looking at, is pretty steep, right? It's a number we need to plan for, and quite frankly, we need to take action for soon. So then we look at this slide. We're going to break down where we are in our different grade bands. And for, again, the purpose of this slide deck, we looked at the grade bands we currently have. This is our K-5 enrollment, again, overlaying PDE and decision insight. Interesting that the elementary projections are not really trending as high as they were previously when we looked at this data. For those of you that really got immersed in our enrollment trends, you see a little bit of a stabilization, I think, in the slope of that line for elementary, although it's still growing, and our elementary schools are currently all over capacity. We then look at our 6 to 8 projections. This is our middle level buildings at our 2 middle schools. And you see that we're relatively stable there when you look at the decision insight averages, but we're showing an increase when we look at PDE. It's interesting that when you look at 2028, 6 years out, we're actually projected to be at the exact same number of students that we are today. But again, PDE average is higher, and we are using the average line with decision insight, being mindful of the fact that we have hundreds and hundreds of dwellings that are being constructed as we sit here. 9 through 12. Again, this is our high school center. This is where all of our kids come. I just actually looked at the enrollment as Sean was gearing up for his presentation. We have just crested 2,100 students, 2,106 kids as of today in our high school. That is a very large building. So you can see that we're moving and already exceeding the number of kids that we're projected to have based on the decision insight data. So we're seeing a lot of mobility. We're seeing a lot of families moving into the organization, into our communities. But again, this is our enrollment projection data. It's not an exact science. I just want to kind of reinforce that quickly. These are people's best judgment call type of predictions using all those data sources that we have. Things like the pandemic, things like birth rate shifting, obviously that has a major impact on the projections, and we see that reflected here. If I could overlay some of the other data, we were projected to go higher when we came before this community and before the board last time. So a little bit of a summary regarding where we are with enrollment and capacity. We are continuing to increase, albeit not at the same rate in the elementary and the middle schools that was previously predicted. We are currently above functional capacity in all of our elementary schools. And I think this is a really critical piece for everyone to understand. Building a school we're adding on to schools today is needed just to alleviate the pressures that we're feeling. So even without enrollment expansion, there's still a need for space in our buildings. Currently, that functional capacity is factored in around 500 students. The needs of the learners in our school communities are changing. We're seeing the need to do some programmatic shifts to ensure that we can meet the needs of children. And specifically, there are some groups of learners that we have here. For example, students that are developing the English language need additional supports that a English proficient student may not need. They need place for program. They need place to have these learning experiences with teachers and other small group instruction spaces that perhaps 20 years ago when these schools were built wasn't a need in our community. So we need to look at the current needs of our school system and our kids as opposed to the needs that existed back in the 90s or early 2000s when many of our schools were constructed. We also spend a lot of time looking at our district, and hopefully you remember seeing this image as well. This is an overlay of our community. The different colors represent the elementary boundary lines where our elementary schools serve. You can see the elementary schools have little icons with flags on the top. And the pink dots are kids. Those are students that attend these schools. The areas in black represent areas that are currently being developed or will be developed. I can say with confidence looking at these black spaces, I believe with the exception of this little square right here, all of them are currently being under construction. Earth has moved, land development work has occurred, and in many cases, there are kids living in those houses. This little square right here, although it seems very small, is mighty. It's going to be a very large complex full of a lot of apartments. So you can't just look at the size of the square and identify that as being a small space. So we continue to look at this, and we continue to look at the density of where those dots are, as well as how they're spread out throughout our different 5 buildings. So some analysis that we've done, and basically a further review, is this trajectory has stabilized beyond our previous projections, which results in slightly a less need moving forward to attain our goals. We also looked at building onto the current elementary schools, and we're going to talk a lot about this in a couple upcoming slides, but about how that may or may not be the right decision for this board to take on. We looked more deeply at property that we own. We own currently the Lincoln Park site. It's the site of the old Lincoln Park Elementary School. And through work with our architects and engineers and our team here, we have determined that we can build an elementary school on that site. Whereas previously we weren't sure that that was a viable option. Albeit currently, and I'll get into this in more depth, that elementary school may need to be capped at 3 sections per grade. The due diligence process that we've been through with looking at another site, a possible school site, has unveiled some other challenges for us that we previously didn't consider. And I'm going to talk through some of those as well. And the last thing I think is a newer piece for me to address is that we're really looking 5 to 7 years out of this enrollment data. The first time we went through this, we looked more towards the 10-year data point, and it's just so hard to project. It's so hard to predict in this world we live in, where we're going to be in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years is really it's just confusing. So we really hunkered down. The demographers we worked with, even Pennsylvania Department of Education, has a huge disclaimer: do not go beyond 5 years. So we're looking really that 5 to 7 years out. When I presented to you today was 6 years. So some considerations and processes that we use to arrive at our recommendation. So this is the one location that we were looking at. We actually made a recommendation to the board in February of last year to build an elementary school. This is where we were considering building that school. So for this exercise, what I did is I took a circle and I just drew from the center of that property 1.5 miles out and created this circle, and I overlaid students that are currently in kindergarten through grade 5. This is the demographer tool that we partner with. And I chose 1.5 miles intentionally because that's actually the radius that we would consider in this type of a building to have students, they would qualify as walkers. Not saying that every kid would walk, but just hypothetically in a utopia, if every kid could, how many kids potentially could walk to the school? And this was interesting to me. I never did this. I never considered it. It came up with 141 kids who currently are in grades K to 5. Lots of challenges also with this site regarding walkability, but we'll address that in a moment. Here's the Lincoln Park site, the other site that we own. Did the same exercise, drew out from the center of Lincoln Park, and realized that it's just a little over 1,000 students. So again, in a perfect world, nearly all of the students, or most of the students, could potentially walk, assuming everything else was perfect. And we know it's not perfect, and there's a lot of work that our transportation team, led by Mr. Williams, would have to lead on this. But you can see that we're nearly 8 times or 9 times more students living in this general region. So that's your Lincoln Park property. Some other considerations we looked at with the State Hill property: cost, transportation, and some considerations regarding, can we actually build on the site as we initially had planned. We also looked at some other things. So we looked at this idea of building a new middle school. We said, there's needs all across the organization. We have needs all the way through K-8, really, and all the way into the high school for that matter. So we looked at this idea, like, what if we would create another middle level experience for students out maybe on the southern side of Spring Township, out where there is a lot of land and currently not a lot of students. And we started to identify that there were some barriers to us bringing that forth as a sound recommendation to our board. Land acquisition and development. Obviously, a lot of work would have to be put into that. We don't have land. We're not aware of the land that would be suitable for a school of this size. Very costly to build a school of this magnitude. I mean, you're looking at a very large school housing, I would say we'd probably build this school for 700, 800, maybe even 900 students. All of the facilities that go with a middle level building. Having 3 middle levels feed 1 high school. Again, just a lot of challenges that we looked at. We would need increased time to fund this and to construct it. We've been building in money in the budget for the last few years, which we're going to touch on with Christine, but it would take us more time. We couldn't, quite frankly, do this with a deliverable date that we have. We also realized that our projections don't warrant this. We don't currently have a need for this much space in our organization, and that would not be a good use of our resources, our money, our human resources to recommend something like that. And then the last piece of consideration was transportation. Possibly, likely a need for a 3-tiered model, which would really disrupt the way our families are used to being transported within the Wilson School District. Again, going back to those values of our community, we would need about an hour and a half in between start of one run and end of the third, which we just don't feel right now is something that this community would be interested in discussing. We also considered adding on to our current elementary schools. We've talked about this multiple times in public. So a lot of work was done here. Again, I want to thank our architects for partnering with us on this. Reminder that those schools were originally built, in most cases, for 400 or less students. We built onto all of them. We've added classrooms, at least 6 classrooms to all those schools. However, we did not do anything to address all of the other issues that go on to adding more kids: parking, common spaces, cafeteria, kitchens, offices, small group instruction spaces, playgrounds. They're all pretty much the way that they were when they were built. We also realized that it's more costly to do it that way, and I will show you a slide that speaks to that. It's not programmatically appropriate to have elementary schools in our leadership team's recommendation, including our principals, to have elementary schools with 725 kids. That's a large school, and it gets programmatically not advisable when you have that many young learners in that space. And I already talked about the common areas, parking, flow of traffic, would all be over capacity. Not easy to change with an addition. So I highlighted some of these pieces here about, why would we not be recommending today this idea. I'm not going to go into each one of those in depth. I think I covered them pretty well. There would also be some staffing needs, just adding teachers and adding square footage. There's operational costs. There's staffing costs that are outside of the classroom, which are listed in this slide deck. We'd have to make sure our kitchens are equipped to feed 700 kids as opposed to how they were designed to feed 400. Lots of things we'd have to consider to make sure that we can deliver the program that our families are used to receiving here at Wilson. Scheduling would be a challenge as well. Navigating the schedule with one specialist in health and physical education and one specialist in discovery and other specialists would be very difficult to service that many kids and to service them to our standard. And then, like I said, the cost of doing so actually exceeds the cost of building a new elementary school. So here's a rendering that the team from Sean did for us a little while back, and it looks at what it would look like if we would build onto an elementary school. And I admit, early on in this process, I'm like, oh, it's not really that challenging. You build 6 classrooms. And I think a lot of us were kind of down that same train of thought until you actually sit down and look at it. 6 classrooms could be 145 kids, right? It's a lot of kids that you're infusing into this school. So you need classroom spaces. You need to have toilet spaces, obviously restrooms for the students. You need to have separate mechanical spaces to make sure you can properly heat and air condition the space. Stairs, corridors, hallways. We also then looked at some of these spaces. We know we can't fit kids in our cafeteria. We already run a hybrid 6-period lunch. We can't add more kids. So what we determined is that we have to expand our cafeteria, possibly look to do some things within our kitchen, and actually build a whole new gymnasium, because those spaces would fall into the current gymnasium space. So basically, what these slides represent is that we are not recommending building onto our elementary schools, not all of which can be built onto, because among many other factors, we believe that it's not fiscally responsible because it would cost more money to get the same number of seats as building a new elementary school. So that basically brings me to our recommendation. Our recommendation for the board and for the community to consider is to build a new 3-section per grade elementary school on the Lincoln Park site, which would create 6 elementary schools in our school district. In addition to that, we're proposing a comprehensive renovation and the construction of roughly 12 additional classrooms off the back of Southern Middle School. Included in that construction will be a new secure entryway and state-of-the-art science labs to create those equitable experiences from our science programming that we've talked about and looked at through pictures previously. Some additional benefits of these recommendations is it allows for future growth within the district. It allows for the possibility down the road of additional pre-K classrooms. If the board would decide we want to move forward with a pre-K classroom in every school to meet the needs of our most needy pre-K learners, we potentially could do that. It eliminates the need to split Spring Ridge Elementary School. Right now, what happens is some of our students who are in grade 5 go to Southern, and some of our students who are in grade 5 go to West. And that is a point of conversation. Actually, our Spring Ridge principal is here with us tonight. Thank you for that. Where I know is a challenge, not only for her, but for us and for those kids who are being separated from their friends. It's just not ideal. It works. We've done it, but it's not what we would recommend moving forward. What this would do for us is basically take that pressure and hit that pressure release valve on our other elementary schools. Assuming we would hit the target of opening this school in August of 2026, what we believe, based on the projected enrollment, is that Lincoln Park would open with approximately 350 kids, approximately. We believe that the other schools that we have, the other 5 elementary schools, would be roughly 500 students. Currently, there is not an elementary school at 500, and we've had elementary schools peak the 600 mark just this past year. So they would feel an immediate pressure release. Kids would feel the room to spread out. Teachers would have a little bit of less congregation, less class size challenges that we have. It allows really to schedule based on what's best for kids. Last bullet point on here is enables the district to create this equitable middle school experience so that all of our students will have the academic programming that's afforded to any other 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader, regardless of where they go to school. I've presented on this before, how there are gaps in the physical plant between these 2 schools. Albeit the bones of Southern Middle School are fantastic. The classrooms are big. Most of the carpet and casework is in good shape. This really allows us to get in there and do a comprehensive reno to make sure every kid and family member is proud to go to Wilson Southern Middle School. So a little bit of proof of concept, what could be, again, very conceptual. This is what the Lincoln Park site could look like. Again, we're not in the design process yet, but the team of engineers and architects have spent some time working with us on some of our needs. So this just basically shows the site. And for those of you that are familiar with the site, you can probably picture the old elementary school that was there. You can see automatically one of the things I noticed was just how much parking there was comparatively to the old Lincoln Park area. You see a separate area for bus drop-offs. You see the footprint of the building. You see a footprint of play area. And then you see a lot of wooded area down here, which would likely need to be used for stormwater retention So not so much for construction, but areas that we would need on the site to allow us to construct such a site or such a building. So I'm presenting today super preliminarily this approximate estimate, and it's a large range because right now we're comfortable saying that we feel we can build a 3 classroom per grade building. Through the conceptual design phase, if the board would so grant us to move forward at an upcoming board meeting, we would try to continue to work with the engineers and the architects to see if there's any capacity to make this school a 4 class per grade site, which would make it the same as our other schools. But again, we're presenting that as a range to you this evening of a $29 to $35 million construction cost. That's all in, again, using Sean's image before bid day, as well as the soft costs that go into that. Here's an overlay of Southern Middle School, and we have spent some time in this site, again, with our team, including from Crabtree, Rorbach Associates, analyzing every room, every hallway, stairwell, making sure that this estimate is as close as we can get it at this stage of the game. So real quickly, blue is new construction. What could be off the back of what I'll refer to as the new section of Wilson Southern. This is the 8th grade hallway going back towards the tennis courts and our transportation department. You'll see the classrooms and the way that they've been able to work them into the site. You'll see that anything in this color here, maybe like a salmon color, that is pretty heavy construction. This is currently the office space, the counselor suite. This is what we call the learning commons. That's the old locker area at Southern Middle School, if anyone went to Southern or had kids there prior to last year. And then you'll see some major renovation over here, which is essentially some office spaces, as well as some of our key corridor areas that were just identified by our team as having too much congregation, too many kids in a very tight space. You'll see a second floor overlay as well. Again, the same colors exist. And then orange represents moderate renovation. Yellow represents, I believe that's yellow, represents light renovation. And then this entire building includes a brand new systems, HVAC system install. So that would be everywhere throughout the building. It's represented in green if that's the only thing that is currently within the scope of work in this estimate. A couple other things that you see is a nice entryway over here. This is currently where most of our families enter the auditorium, whether they're coming from Cornwall Terrace or they're coming from Southern Middle School to any type of a performance, event, or ceremony. So recommending to do a nice facade update there to make sure that that's a nice entryway for our families and our kids. Also looking to add on to the front of the school to do a nice secure entryway, moving some of this office space out here, and then some type of really distinguishing feature here is some of the preliminary conversations for Wilson Southern. What will set this school apart and make it unique, perhaps from some other schools? So the scope of work here is a larger price tag, somewhere between $39 and $44 million is our current approximate costs. Obviously, things are all in flux right now with the cost of products and availability of goods, but we do feel strong about that number, presenting that number to you this evening. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Schlossman to talk through the cost and the funding models.
Thank you, Dr. Trickett. Good evening, everyone. So this is a summary of what we just saw related to the cost range for the Lincoln Park Site Elementary School proposal, as well as the Southern Middle School renovations and addition. So that totals $68 to $79 million. However, we do have some excess funds from our 2021C general obligation bond, which was part of the original phase 1 construction financing. So that's a range between $14 and $15 million that we can apply to phase 2. So that would estimated additional funding calculation would be $53 to $65 million. So just a summary of our current existing debt for Wilson School District. We currently have $100.3 million in outstanding bonds and notes with final maturity in fiscal year 2033. Our annual debt service payments are $10.9 million, and our additional borrowing capacity is currently at $160.8 million. So based on what we had just seen, the estimated additional funding needed for construction costs for phase 2 would be an amount of not to exceed $65 million. Based on that, we consulted with our financing team, and that is a projected 11 additional years of debt service while we can maintain our current run rates with no additional millage impact due to some wraparound financing, which we'll hear about in a second. And we can maintain our favorable AA debt rating with the additional debt issuance. So now I'd like to turn it over to our financing consultants, Scott Kramer and Allie Mackey from Raymond James, and Michael Vind from FSL Public Finance.
Good evening. Whenever we follow the architect's presentation, I'll often wonder why we can't have a flyover of our presentation. I would love a flyover, just can't do it. So we're going to talk about the financial side of the project. My part of the presentation is to give you a little bit of flavor for the current interest rate environment that we're in at the moment. This chart shows you the historical, what's called the MMD, which is the municipal yield curve, and how your bonds would be issued in the marketplace. The light blue vertical lines across the page are the highs and lows going back to 1993. You can see that the dark blue and the red line in the middle of the page represent the average interest rate curve and also where the interest rates are today with the red line. You can see we're about in the middle or the average of where it's been going back to 1993. The one point I would make with respect to the red line is you can see with the early part of the yield curve, the first 5 years are what we call inverted, meaning that the yields on the first 5 years of the curve are higher than the belly of the curve and in some places the longer part of the yield curve. That's a function of what's happened with, you've been all watching the news, the Federal Reserve raising rates pretty significantly over the past 2 years. I think the consensus is we're finished with the rate hikes, maybe one more at the end of this year, depending on some of the economic numbers that we see coming forward. The next slide is history, again, going back to 1990. You can see that the general trend has been lower with the bottom early part of January 2020. During the pandemic, we've had a pretty significant rise with respect to rates, but again, historically speaking, fairly low over the last 30 to 40 years. One thing I would point out here is the district has taken advantage of refinancing opportunities along the way and issued the first series of bonds for your Performing Arts Center, literally at the bottom of the market. I think when I was here last, the yield on that issue was 1.5% of the issue that first $40 million at. So that's a pretty attractive rate for a large part of the existing debt. Again, by way of refresher, this is the district's existing summary of debt. You can see in columns 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Those are the previous issues. A lot of that was refinancings along the way, as I mentioned. The key takeaway here is your existing debt before we do anything runs out to 2033. If you look at the far right-hand column, column 10. And as Christine mentioned, the annual run rate or the amount that's in your budget currently for debt service is level at about $10.9 million per year. Out there in 2033, it drops from 10.9 down to $2.2 million. The other thing I would note on this page is column 9 is the debt service for that first $40 million that we issued back in 2021 at the bottom of the market. And so had we not started phase 1 and the financing, your debt would have only run out 6 more years. And so the message here, and I think I've delivered this message many times before, is this is a very unusual debt profile relative to your peers, a district of this size. And we're going to talk about that in a later slide. This slide and this existing debt portfolio is one of the reasons why you carry the AA rating from S&P. but it also allows you a great deal of flexibility in considering the options that we're going to talk about here in a second for financing these projects. The wraparound structure that Christine referenced compared to 20, 25, and 30 years, like your home mortgage, much more efficient vehicle. And that also allows us with a little bit of restructuring to minimize the impact, in fact, reduce the impact to zero and keep that run rate for debt service at $10.9 million. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to talk about the financing plan, and then Allie's going to follow that up with the Moody's rating report.
Good evening. As Scott mentioned, we used $65 million as the high-end target, as Christine had gone through in her presentation, just to show you what this would look like given today's rates, with actually the current rates plus 25 basis points. So we gave a little bit of a buffer in there, and what that would look at and look like from a run rate perspective. Instead of just doing, as Scott mentioned, 25 or 30-year level debt service, like a traditional home mortgage, that would add significant annual cost to the current debt structure. So what we did was we restructured some existing debt, layered on then the $65 million, again, the high range of that project. And you can see after this is all done, column 7, we're staying at that $10.9 million run rate. So we wanted to have as least budget impact as possible, and what this would look like. And we're going out an additional 11 years to 2044. So that $65 million plus a restructuring would go out to 2044 and add just an 11-year for this entire package. As Christine mentioned earlier, the borrowing capacity is a little over $160 million. The restructuring of $27 million of debt, again, that would provide room to allow us to keep at that $10.9 million run rate. That total cost is $2.3 million over the life. So the net present value cost of that restructuring and then moving the principal around is going to cost approximately $2.3 million. The cost of money is extremely high. You can earn a lot more on your funds. So if you were going to issue, we did not, and you can earn about 5% right now in today's market, we did not take that into account in that $2.3 million. So that's just the cost, and anything that you earn on those funds while they're waiting to be deployed for construction would lower that impact of the $2.3 million. Again, 11 years with all the debt being ended in 2044. And then in this box, or in this table, what we did was we ran the wraparound, which debt service package that we have been talking about, plus 20 years, 25 and 30-year level debt service. So you can see the impact of that. It would add about $2.9 million, $2.985 million with the wraparound debt service. However, we are going to do the restructuring, so that number is going to be reduced to zero. If you just did 20-year level debt service, that would add an additional $4.7 million to that $10.9 million run rate. 25 would be $4.3 million, and 30 years would be about $4 million. The average all-in true interest cost, you can see in the bottom, also the total principal and interest. And from budgetary impact, we feel that this is the most cost-effective model to fund something of this size. And with that, I'm going to let Allie go through the credit rating discussion.
Okay, so I think one of the questions the administration posed to us was, how do we know if we undertake a project of this size that we're going to come out the other end of this as financially stable as we are today? So we tried to put together an idea of what the rating agencies look at, because that really kind of gives you an idea. That's what investors look to when they go to buy your bonds. What does Moody's say your rating is? What does S&P say your rating is? As a benchmark, really, for how fiscally sound the plan is and the administrative end of things are. So Wilson is currently rated AA stable by Standard & Poor's. The last time you guys went through the rating process was in conjunction with those 2021 C bonds back in May of 2021. You'll look to the table at the right there. We put all of your Berks County peers on that table so you could see how your rating stacks up against all the other districts in the county. You have the highest rating, along with Exeter and Muhlenberg, who are rated the same as you are. And then you'll see the other schools in the district underneath who are lower rated than you at AA-, A+, and Baa2. statewide, the district's one of only 30 PA school districts that are in the AA rating category by S&P, and one of 85 districts in the AA category as a whole, so a AA plus, AA, or AA minus. So it's an incredibly strong rating. If you look down below, that's the full rating criteria for each rating agency in terms of how the scale works. You might have heard on the news last week that Fitch downgraded the US credit rating to AA plus from AAA. So they're now one rating above Wilson School District. So that, you know, is something to be proud of. You're one notch below the federal government. We went back to your rating report from May of 2021, and we just wanted to note a couple of the things that they noted, which are credit strengths, which is your stable local economy here. You have strong incomes and a strong tax base, and you have strong operations and a strong reserve position. For the rating agencies, cash is king. They always want to see you have cash on hand. Spending down fund balance or reserves is an automatic red flag to them or a negative when you go through this financing process. So not that you can't use cash for things, but if you're going to undertake something like this, we always say keep it till the end and downsize your final borrowing, because they'll want to see that you have that until the plan is complete. The credit challenges, honestly, challenges of all school districts in the state of Pennsylvania, elevated pension and OPEB costs. And then they note things that could potentially lead to the district being upgraded, which is that your reserves or economic metrics improve relative to the AA plus rated peers, or a lower debt burden. And factors that could lead to a downgrade would be the operations becoming unbalanced, any budgetary performance that was negative or causing fund balance to fall below the levels that they consider to be very strong. So the main takeaway, again, is that when we want to add some significant leverage, like we're talking about here, that will pressure that rating, we want to keep our cash balances and reserves strong because we want to maintain that higher grade rating. The higher rating, the lower your interest cost. So, you know, if you're going to borrow for something like this, you want the lowest interest cost you can potentially receive. So we wanted to show you kind of how the rating agency is going to look at you based on the financials and the potential $65 million of additional leverage. You are rated by S&P. We're going to show you the Moody's methodology. The reason is they're much more transparent about how they rate you and how the scorecard works. I think Mike and Scott would say we've been through thousands of rating calls, both with S&P and Moody's, and it is exceedingly rare to see a difference between the two. So as an indication, Moody's should still give you the same indication as S&P would give you, even though we're showing you Moody's and you're rated by S&P. So this is the Moody's scorecard factors. You can see there's 4 components to this: the economy, the leverage, the financial performance, and the institutional framework. Only 2 of these 4 bubbles can be controlled by the district. You can't control the economy, so you can't control your resident income, your full value per capita, or your enrollment trends, which make up 30% of your rating. And you can't factor the institutional framework. That's just a high-level state-mandated metric that Moody's assigns an A rating to for the state of Pennsylvania for all districts. So you can't control that to 10% either. So there's 40% of your rating that you can't necessarily control. So the 2 things you can control are the long-term liabilities ratio and the fixed cost ratios under leverage, which makes up 30% of the rating. And then your available fund balance ratio and your net cash ratio, which is the other 30% of your rating. So that 60% you can control by how much leverage you put on and how much cash you have in the bank and things that you potentially can control better than the other 40%. Now that was the above the line part that is based on data. This is the notching factors. So they always reserve the right to notch the district's rating up or down based on these other items. Really the only one we ever see them use, probably for school districts in Pennsylvania, is potential or significant change in leverage. I mean, have you guys ever seen any of the other ones be used? So they're more for other entities that they rate, but you know, that is a significant part of the story, because when we go to the rating agencies and we're on the phone with Christine and the folks at your administration, They want us to tell them a good story, and they want a plan. They want to know that this is how we're going to do it, and that at the end, we're going to do what we said we were going to do. And the more they buy into that, the less this becomes a factor to the rating. So we went ahead and we took your fiscal year 2022 financial statements. We dropped them into my Moody's scorecard to get the data-driven part of this. Again, they could notch it up or down depending on however they view things. But for the data part of this, you'll see that once we put in your economy, financial performance, and leverage information, the blue box there at the bottom, you come out with a 3.3, which is equivalent to a AA2 rating. That is directly the equivalent of a AA rating from Standard & Poor's, which is what you're currently rated. Then we wanted to add that additional $65 million of leverage and see how much pressure that puts on the rating. So you'll see where the red arrows are there, that increasing the leverage by $65 million increases your long-term liabilities ratio, dropping you from the AA3 category in that one line item to the A1 category. And then the fixed cost ratio, actually, you're just over the edge there at 14.6. The next level down to AA plus would be at 15%. So when you factor all that together, your issuer rating slides to a 3.5, which is at the bottom of the band there to the right that I've circled, but you are still in the AA category. And the thing we haven't accounted for here is we've just assumed that you keep the cash you have today on hand. So you'll see those financial performance ratios are exactly the same between the two. But in reality, it's likely with what you're earning on cash just from your investments and things like that, and adding to fund balance, that side of the house will actually improve versus the leverage, going the other direction. So we feel very good about the plan, and if the plan is executed the way it's laid out, that the rating agencies would not potentially downgrade the district out of the AA rating that you currently hold just based on the $65 million worth of leverage. And again, that's just a kudos to the administration and the board and what you all have done over the last 10, 15 years to get yourself in a position to be able to layer on that amount of leverage and really not tip the scale from a rating perspective.
I think, just real quick, I think the message there is, I've said this before, we want you going into this project to come out on the other side as strong as you went in. And so the goal is to put a plan in place that doesn't jeopardize the other things that you want to do around the district, the programs, the level of classroom space, all those things you want to maintain in a positive direction. We don't want the financing plan to jeopardize that or put you into a corner that you can't, frankly, get out of. And so I think what this proves out is that the rating agencies, not just your financing team, is telling you that by adding the additional debt, you've not jeopardized or should not jeopardize all the things that you want to continue to do here at Wilson School District. You're going to be just as strong on the other side. Again, to the superintendent's comment, we can only look 5 to 7 years out. We don't know what lies 7, 10, 15 years out. But if we were back here having a conversation about another project, you certainly would have the ability to do another project down the road. If it came around, you're going to have refinancing opportunities along the way. So again, keeping the financial house in order is very, very important to us. That rating is very, very important to you. And as Allie said, I think the board, the prior boards, this board, this administration, prior administrations have really put you in a place to succeed long term. The debt profile that I talked about in the first, second, or third slide there is very, very important to your success, and where you're starting from and where you're going to end up is a very strong position.
And then the chart at the bottom is just to show you that, this is a statewide view. We showed you the Berks County view of where your Berks County peers are rated. But on a statewide basis, most issuers are rated A2 and above, which is 4 notches below what you were rated. And so you are considered very highly rated in the K-12 sector in Pennsylvania as you currently stand today. And then lastly, we just wanted to give you some idea of what your peers are doing. So we looked at a couple of districts that have similar size budgets to Wilson. We looked at what their current debt service run rates are and their final maturities on their existing debt. And then we kind of just layered in here some of their preliminary estimated future financing plans, things we know they have going on or are considering, so that you can kind of get a taste for their future run rates and final maturities after they would execute a similar financing plan to what Wilson is considering. You'll notice Hempfield is potentially looking at increasing their run rate north of $6 million with a 2047 final maturity, financing $150 million. Manheim Township is doing a similar exercise to what we've shown you here tonight, where they did a restructuring already. They've restructured their debt down to $12 million, but kept the $14 million run rate in their budget. So they're figuring out what can they borrow and use up that $2 million of excess that they currently have because of the restructuring. And Dallastown is looking at $120 million of potential projects, raising their run rate over $3 million, $3.5 million with a 2049 final maturity. And we know Parkland's considering a very large capital project. It looks about, at the moment, maybe 130 million plus, but they already have a $12.7 million run rate for debt service currently that runs to 2036. So just a little bit of information to show you you're not the only ones considering this type of financing or financing plan, and that there are other folks around the state that are doing the exact same thing and figuring out how to fund it similar to how you all are. Anything else? Thank you.
Okay, so that was a summary of the construction cost that we would be taking on with this phase 2 recommendation. We also want to talk about our annual operating cost projections. And as we had discussed in the last several budgets that we developed since 2021-22's budget, we began the phase-in process, phasing in mills to support the annual operating cost projections of our enrollment growth. So this table shows the elementary and the Southern Middle School enrollment growth that is projected, as we had seen earlier in the presentation, and also the additional costs of opening a new elementary building and also adding on to the Southern Middle School building for that growth. So this table shows on the leftmost side the elementary costs. So we're looking at the organic growth of Wilson School District based on the enrollment is going to cost approximately $1.2 million in staffing. The addition of the actual elementary school, a separate building, will create the need to have other personnel in that building, special student support, special teachers for special programs, and also some non-personnel costs of the operating costs of running the building with utilities and whatnot. So that total enrollment growth plus the new building would total $3.5 million. On the rightmost hand side of the table, we look at the middle school that Chris had talked about. And that has to do with our enrollment growth in the middle school area, but also staffing those programs to make it similar to West. And that would be additional staffing just organically as well. And then with the middle school addition, that would be the operating costs of having that additional square footage. So total all in at this point with our best estimate projection for elementary would be $3.5 million at opening and $0.6 million when we have the Southern Middle School built, that addition and renovations. So you can see that that is in line with what we had projected in our budget process through the years. We were projecting to be at a phase-in of $3.5 million by August of 2026. And the board has also committed fund balance for enrollment growth of $2.5 million currently, with the potential of additional infusion into that committed fund balance when we see the final results of the 2023 audit. So I will now turn it over to Dr. Trickett.
Thank you, Christine. So just a very brief timeline here of some potential next steps. Here we are tonight presenting to the school board and our community regarding our recommendations. We are proposing that we take the next day here to finalize a thought exchange to push that out on August 9th. Sharing this information with the community via a video and some information, and just simply asking them for their thoughts and for them to reflect on what they saw and to give us their feedback. Knowing that we really need to stick in our recommendation professionally to try to get this building open in the summer of 2026. The timeline is somewhat aggressive here, so we are looking to move for a possible board vote as soon as we can, as early as August 21st, perhaps in the first week of September or first board meeting of September if needed, on phase 2. And what that will look like is the authorization to proceed with Crabtree, Orbach, and Associates on the conceptual design phase of this elementary school and Lincoln Park, as well as a comprehensive renovation and addition at Southern Middle School. So far, we've been working with them in good faith and really need to solidify an agreement to continue that work. So those are the next steps that we have outlined, and at this point, I'll turn it over to President Cocker to facilitate any conversation she would like to have.